Hello everyone, and thank you very much for joining our webinar today. My name is Dean Schmidt. I'm the Sales Operations Manager here at DerbySoft and have a great presentation today. We're going to be talking about budgeting for Metasearch. For those of you that have joined our previous webinars, you may recall we've had a four-part webinar series which is being wrapped up by today's presentation. So we started off talking about Metasearch, what it is, what it does, and why it matters. We talked about the pros and cons of assisted booking models. We talked about the roles of rate parity, both seen and unseen, and of course today talking about budgeting for Metasearch, which really incorporates many of the facets that we talked about in some of the previous presentations, and I'll be referring back to several of those. With that, we're going to talk a little bit about what should I budget, playing the budget volleyball game as I call it, alignment of budget and goals, and of course a recap of some of the previous webinars and presentations. Okay, so with that, we'll go ahead and get started. By the way, as we're going through the presentation today, if you do have any questions, please feel free to use the chat function that you'll see on the right-hand side of your dashboard. Even if you are watching this by way of the Webinar Jam replay link, you can actually type questions in there, and those will be forwarded to this. And so we can answer those for you on the fly. Okay, first and foremost, so what should I budget for Metasearch? That's the big question we're coming to answer here today, right? And my first answer to you is going to be stop, hold on just a second. My answer is actually, you shouldn't. Let that sink in for a sec. Yes, you heard that correctly. And by the end of this webinar, you'll understand why. And furthermore, you will understand what you really should be doing with those marketing dollars. Now, first, let me clarify. I'm not saying that you should omit Metasearch sites from your marketing plans. In fact, quite the opposite. However, what I am saying is that we need to make one thing absolutely clear. Metasearch sites do not have their own supply. Anytime that your hotel is being displayed with rate results, these are being linked out to another site. Even if the assisted booking engines such as TripAdvisor, Instant Booking, or Google's Book on Google are being used, they still have to have that booking fulfilled by a supplier. The only question is who or how. Now, conversion rates may vary a little bit between different sites, but let's assume that the clicker, in this case, has the intent of making a reservation. Would you prefer to get this booking through an OTA site or through your hotel's own website? And the answer to that may seem obvious, and many articles are coming out these days. Not a day goes by hardly that we don't see somebody talking about direct bookings and the push of a lot of the different brands for direct bookings and the value of these. And yet it is completely counterintuitive to the ongoing practice of setting a Metasearch marketing budget. You see, as soon as you decide that you have exceeded that budget, you are effectively saying you would rather have the Metasearch page in question send that consumer to an OTA site rather than you own. Now, who cares? You still get the booking, right? And let somebody else fund the pay-per-click fees. However, it is not quite that simple. Even if the cost of distribution were the same, and they most definitely are not, having the reservation diverted to an OTA site immediately presents alternate booking options. It decreases your brand loyalty, robs your hotel of any pre or post-stay marketing opportunities, and really shows whether or not you have the best rate out there. It might be another hotel that's competing in your same class of hotel with a better rate. So a lot of different options that come up. Now add to this the fact that even with the pay-per-click fees involved, your direct booking costs are quite likely 5 to 15 full percentage points lower than coming from a third party. So think of it this way. You decide to shut off or not even be involved in your Metasearch campaigns. You're saying that rather than paying 15% to get the booking through your own website, you would rather pay 25% to get the same booking from an OTA. So the question then becomes, aside from inventory constraints, why would you shut this off at all? And the answer is you shouldn't. That's exactly what we're saying here. There is no difference here than paying a commission on any other reservation, except that it costs less and you're directly connected to the guest. So it seems like a no-brainer, right? Then why isn't everybody doing this? And well, there are a few catches. You do have to get connected to these channels, and you have to understand what your goals are and develop campaign strategies around those. Now, discussions around these strategies often focus on return on ad spend as the key measurement of success. And we have to think about that measuring stick just a little bit, because that provides a very limited view of the true objectives. Now, yes, getting return is important. However, a 50-to-1 return on ad spend is not of much use if it only results in 2 bookings. So the challenge is to find that sweet spot to deliver the highest volume at the lowest cost. And indeed, that is a challenge. There are many complexities to that. But a better way to measure your Metasearch campaign is by defining the cost of sale, or COS. Your cost of sale will enable you to more accurately compare the results of your Metasearch campaigns versus the traffic that is coming from those online travel agencies. The cost of sale needs to account for the click cost incurred in your listing, the conversion rate of those clicks, and the revenue generated as a result of them. So as we talk about cost of sale, do you remember back in a previous presentation, if you happen to attend those, that we talked about the 3 keys to success of a successful Metasearch campaign: rate parity, conversion, and low cost per clicks. Now let's talk about how those all blend in when we talk about our cost of sale. So cost of sale equals my total cost per click divided by my total revenue. So let's assume that we've got a $2 cost per click and a 10% conversion rate, meaning it takes 10 clicks to get a booking. That results in a $20 total cost factor involved, $20 CPC total. Now, against $500 in room revenue, that means you've got a 4% cost of sale. That same cost against a $135 room revenue means that you have a 15% cost of sale. All right, so as we can see with that, by increasing our conversion number and lowering our cost per click, those numbers in turn can lower the cost of sale. And rate parity, of course, plays a key in that. In fact, we have an entire webinar presentation that talks about that as part of this 4-part series. Okay, but one of the challenges that comes into play with that is, where does the funding come from? And this gets into what we call the budget volleyball game, especially between the marketing department and the reservations department. There's a lot of back and forth. You'll have one department that says, nope, that's a reservation. It should be paid out of the reservations department's budget. They'll say, nope, that's a marketing program, part of your e-commerce. That should be paid out of the marketing budget. And a lot of times at the end of the day, it ends up looking kind of more like this, more like a mud volleyball game than anything. And so it can become very challenging. And I'm not here to necessarily answer exactly where those funds should come from, but to give you some feedback and some ideas to have that discussion and come up with those answers. So first of all, how do we resolve that? And there's a couple of different ways, and we have to look at how we can approach the funding for our Metasearch campaigns. Now, one of these approaches is what we call the CPA, or cost per acquisition, also referred to as your commission models. Google and TripAdvisor both offer these, and we have a separate presentation webinar called Pros and Cons of Assisted Booking, which I encourage you to view to get more details on that. So one of the advantages of those, they are safe. There's very little risk to them. There's no budget line item required. Now, one of the disadvantages to them is that you don't get a lot of control. In fact, for that matter, you have to install a pixel from each of the channels that are involved. So if you were doing both Google and TripAdvisor, you'd have to have pixel installed from both of those in order to track the revenue that's coming from them. But it is a very safe way of doing that. And if you're not sure what to do with your budget, that may be practical to do that. By way of comparison, your standard CPC models have an advantage in the fact that you get to have control over your own objectives. Fewer pixels required because you don't have to have them following your commissions all the way through to the booking funnel. But the disadvantage is they do require some funding, and the results may vary depending upon especially what your strategies are and what your goals are. So what about those goals? Let's talk about those for just a minute, because after all, isn't my marketing objectives always about making money? And the answer is no, not necessarily. It is about more than just bookings. Of course, bookings are very important. But why else is Metasearch important? Well, for one thing, for branding, especially branding, in fact. And you might say that, hey, we want our branded website to occupy the first position with every result, regardless of the return. And this is a legitimate strategy. It may be appropriate to achieve certain goals. However, it is usually most effective for short-term promotions. So you may be looking for that volume. You may be looking for owning the guest. And, let's face it, if you don't show up there, somebody else will. We talked about that earlier. Another thing that we often hear from people is that they'll take a strategy of, hey, let's just apply the same principles across all of the different Metasearch channels. Well, This also is not quite the ideal approach. Different channels have different results, different influences and behaviors that are involved. Google alone has 3 different types of channels, including the hotel on their hotel price ads, uh, which will include your local universal, your branded search terms, your map results, and even your places page. And they all have different types of followers. Uh, when you're looking for somebody's property name, Internet Marketing 101 says, hey, I want to own that space. That's my branded search terms that people are looking for. And so that to me is one of the hot buttons when we talk about looking at Metasearch channels and understanding that, hey, we need to make sure we're putting an equal investment into that as we are into our paid search terms. Okay, so let's review. So far, I've told you to dump your Metasearch marketing budget on its head. And you're going right about now, okay, Dean, you know, that's a great idea, bright idea, light bulb moment, but the fact of the matter is there has to be some dollar signs that go with it. I get it, but I still need a budget. Never fear, we're going to help you out too. I'm not just going to leave you hanging with this idea that you have to have an unlimited budget out there. So let's talk about if we have to have a budget, how do we do this? Well, first of all, we need to understand a few things. First of all, what are my goals? What am I trying to do? Is this all about driving traffic? Am I trying to get a high return on my ad spend? Am I trying to just get some visibility? What are my goals? And how do these goals compare with other campaigns that I'm running? Although the proportionate factor is not there, it shouldn't have the same exact volume as your paid search campaigns. We do often find that Metasearch channels will have similar trends as your paid search campaigns. If you're getting more traffic from paid search, you probably ought to be getting more traffic from Metasearch as well, because the same influencers are there. And in fact, they come from a lot of the same sources, right? So they should have very similar behaviors. What is my cost of sale? We talked about that earlier. That's an important number to understand. If my cost of sale is really high, I have to take that into account when I'm thinking about my budget. How is my rate parity? I know everybody likes to say they have perfect rate parity, but let's face it, that's not reality. We don't. There are rate parity issues all across the board, and we see that in Metasearch. It becomes very transparent. As I mentioned before, we have an entire webinar actually that talks about that specific fact. But one particular part of it is the fact that rate parity has a direct impact on your cost per click, on your visibility, and your returns coming from Metasearch campaign. And of course, you know, we can get all the clicks that we want to your website, but somebody has to make a booking sooner or later. So what is my conversion rate? That's one of the other keys to success we talked about for a successful campaign. How are they converting? And what are my cost per clicks? You know, good grief, if you've got a $10 cost per click, that could be very dangerous if you have a $200 room rate, right? So we have to make sure we're looking at channels that have a cost per click that's going to fit into our budget, and look at how that plays a role with all of these other factors that we want to identify on here. Great information to have. And in a perfect world, we all have that information. But what if I don't have this data? And let's face it, many times we don't. And so we may be coming into this a little bit blind. Where do we start from? Well, one of the first things to do is perhaps look at one of those commission models that we talked about, because that could help gather some data with minimal risk involved. You can start getting some history, start seeing what is going to be required in the way of commissions and CPC. By the way, keep in mind, most commission models will be reverse engineered into what we call an effective cost per click at the end of the day. And that's how they get a lot of their ranking out of that. So dabble with that a little bit and see if you can get some historical data from it. You know, we are in a hospitality industry. We know people, right? Your buddy across the street or across town or maybe in another city, whatever, may have experimented or worked or is currently working with the Metasearch channel. How are they doing? Seek out comparisons with similar hotels and markets. Go to agencies such as our own here, Derbysoft. We can provide some data that represents similar hotels and regions and markets and do some comparison with that. And we're certainly not the only agency out there that has this information. So I encourage you to shop around, find agencies that can help you identify that a little bit. And, you know, test the water, dip your toe in the water a little bit, run a campaign, get some historical data. Because really, before you can commit to a budget for 2017, that's going to be one of the most important things to do. If you have no historical data, you're trying to throw a dart at a dartboard with your eyes closed and making a best guess at best. So it's important to gather as much data as you can and put that together. Okay, so back to those goals. Told you I wasn't going to leave you hanging here. So let's talk about a couple of scenarios, because it's really hard to say what exactly should your budget be without saying, well, here's the example or the strategy we're trying to fulfill. All right, so scenario number one, I call this the perfect story. And this is where everything is operating exactly the way you want it to do. So you're saying, hey, I want to have top placement on all the major channels. I have excellent rate parity. In fact, my rates on my website are lower than the OTAs. My conversion rates historically from Metasearch have been coming in at about 7.5%. My CPCs are low, like below $3 per click. My cost of sale is around 9%, and this performs better than my paid search ads. Fantastic. So, solution, bigger is better. Need to cover as many channels as possible to generate volume. You want to get as much volume from as many places as you can, and not just the ones that are predominant in your area. Of course, I'm in the United States, so naturally we think about Google, Kayak, and TripAdvisor, but there are other channels out there, your Travagos, your Wegos, your Tunars, and so on. And more clicks will, of course, mean that more budget is required. In this example, though, it might be worth pulling some of that money from your paid search campaigns to compensate. I know that stings a little bit, especially because a lot of times whoever's looking at this Metasearch may not be the same person that's doing paid search, so you're stealing from somebody else. But one of the trends that we do see is where the Google hotel ads, for example, and the different Metasearch channels, if they are performing better than paid search, a lot of times they're even cannibalizing from that. So it may not only be a logical step in terms of the return on ad spend and the revenue from it, but it may also be practical just in terms of the volume if you're seeing some shift. Ultimately, we are trying to shift some traffic here, right? That is our goal. So it makes sense that we should be shifting budget to go along with that. Okay, that's my perfect story. Now let's go to scenario number two. This is the reality show. It is a little bit more realistic, and we're saying I want as much exposure as I can get, but I have to keep within a monthly budget regardless of performance. And I don't have a lot of historical data. I just know that I need my cost of sale to be under 12%. Okay, so solution here, control is the key. We need to start generating some traffic, first of all, to analyze this historical data. We've got to see where we're at and set a baseline here so we know what we're dealing with. But we also need to make sure we keep a broad selection of channels to play or in place so that we can diversify the portfolio. This is like investing in a 401k here. You want a diversified portfolio so that if you've got one channel that is performing really well but has its ups and downs, its ebbs and tides, that can be compensated for by any of the other channels that are also having their own ups and downs. So research and understand the cost per clicks associated with each channel. They are not all the same. And apply a cross-channel optimization strategy. Now, we can help you with that, DerbySoft. That's one of the things that we do, but I encourage you to consult with an agency about this to get more detail. If nothing else, look to the agency that's handling your internet paid search campaigns. They may not be focused on Metasearch. That may not be their thing, but they will be familiar with it, and at the very least know somebody else who is, if all else fails. But that's a good reference point to start with. Probably most everybody listening to this webinar has somebody handling a pay-per-click campaign for their hotel. So start with that agency, if nothing else, and get their advice. Look at some of the baselines that they've established with their pay-per-click campaigns and use that as a reference point for your budgets. Okay, and then my third scenario, I have one more here for you. This is one I call the safety dance. Now that I've got that song playing in your head, it's the example where we say, I want to play, but I can't fit it into my budget this year and honestly have no idea what to expect in terms of performance. Solution, seek out those commission models that I talked about earlier. Google and TripAdvisor are good examples of these, and they can help you dip your toe in the water, and then you can use this data to help guide those future plans. Once you've got some historical information in play, you can start extrapolating that to understand better, okay, what does my competition look like in this market? What am I needing to do for a CPC? What is my conversion rate? What is my revenue? I need these numbers so that I, as a hotelier, can start putting together an educated guess or an educated proposal for my budget in 2017. Okay, I know we've talked about these scenarios. I've talked about strategies and ideas and theories and philosophies about putting together this budget for your Metasearch campaigns. And right about now, you're just going, okay, Dean, just give me a number. Okay, the ultimate answer to life, the universe, and everything is 42. Yes, I know that doesn't do you a lot of good. Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, if anybody's not familiar with that. And before, however, we say so long and thanks for all the fish, let me defer to a little toy that we've put together for you. And as I'm talking about this, I'm going to switch screens, so bear with me for just a moment. While I'm doing that, I'm also going to take the URL that you see here and plug it into the chat window within the Webinar Jam dashboard. Because what we have is a revenue calculator that we've put together. And there's a method to the madness here and reason that we're using this. Because what we're going to do is essentially reverse engineer this just a little bit. And what I mean by that is we're going to come back in here and we're going to think about, all right, what type of a hotel am I? And what sort of revenue should I expect to receive from this? Okay, and that's the starting point. We'll see where this goes. So first of all, in this revenue calculator that you, and again, I copied the URL on there for you. You can come in here and let's say we type in our number of rooms. Let's say that we're a decent sized hotel. Let's say we've got 450 rooms. My average length of stay, well, let's go ahead and leave it at 2.5. That's pretty good. Let's say that my average daily rate is about $285. My occupancy runs at about 80%. And then what type of a property am I? Now, we certainly don't have every single type of property covered in here. These were some that we put together based on a sampling of data. And by the way, this is by no means supposed to be an absolute, definitive, accurate number. This is a good sampling of data that we used, but we encourage you to talk with us and we can get a kind of a better example for your revenue expectations. But let's say, for example, that I'm a branded urban limited service hotel. All right, so based on that, and forgive my decimal point going all the way out here. That's what happens when you can't round numbers very good. But anyway, so based on that, on the low end of things, we would anticipate your annual revenue from Metasearch to be around $641,000. At about a mid-tier level, we'll be about at just short of $900,000. And let's say at a high level, really aggressive in it, we're probably at $1.1 billion. Okay, so what's my budget? Coming back to the budget for this, right? So we're estimating, and these are fairly conservative numbers. We wanted to try, and that's on purpose. We want to try and keep this conservative. But if I estimate that I'm going to be at about $900,000 in revenue from Metasearch. Now, if I think that back through and say, okay, so I think that based on my numbers that I can get about a 10% cost of sale. So if my cost of sale is 10% at $900,000, I do that math backwards. That means I need $90,000. That's my ad spend for that revenue, right? So we can kind of reverse engineer that. And I encourage you to go in here and play around with this. As I mentioned, we posted the link in the chat window of the Webinar Jam. You can click on there, or let me come back to my PowerPoint presentation. So if you're watching this later and just need to view it, bear with me for just a second here. We'll share the other window real quick. There we go. So that is www.bit.ly/metarevcalc. Try to keep it as abbreviated as possible. So go in there and play around with that. I think that'll be a good way to get some ideas to what sort of revenue you should expect. And as I said, reverse engineer that into an estimate of what your ad spend needs to be. And of course, other factors will play a part in that. Your cost of sale is going to be subject to your conversion rates, to your CPCs, to your rate parities, and all those different factors that we talked about. And you may say, well, I think my cost of sale is a little bit higher. Great, you can adjust that, or a little bit lower. You can adjust that likewise. Okay, so with that, let's do a little bit of a recap of what we've talked about. Again, this has been a part of a 4-part webinar series. If you have joined the previous ones, thank you for coming along for this ride with us. Again, we started off a little bit talking about what it is, what it does, why Metasearch matters, and covering the basic overview of Metasearch in our industry. And there's a recorded webinar that's available online. You're welcome to replay that for more details. The pros and cons of assisted booking models, which relate to those commission models that we talked about in this presentation, are not exclusive to, though. In some examples, you can actually do an assisted booking model with a CPC as well. So replay that webinar and find out more details if you're curious about that. How rate parity will impact your cost per click, your positioning, and your success in your Metasearch campaign. It has impacts that are both seen and unseen, and they are certainly very important. And of course, today, this webinar about budgeting for Metasearch. And hopefully we've given you some good guidelines to follow. For more concrete details about what's going to be proper for your hotel, reach out to us. Contact us, contact your agency. We can help you. Obviously, there's no one-size-fits-all that is appropriate for everybody, and we can consult with you and get you some more accurate numbers as you plan ahead to 2017. We do have some upcoming Metasearch webinars as well, which will include an in-depth look at the individual channels, including TripAdvisor, Google, and probably a split session with both Trivago and Kayak included with that. So stay tuned for more information on those if you're curious about learning more about what TripAdvisor's single chevron view means, what Google's Book on Google looks like, how Trivago features the Hotel Direct website, and what's the difference between Core and Bob on Kayak. We'll talk more about those things and other details as well. Once again, thank you for your time here today. We hope you enjoyed this presentation. Again, my name is Dean Schmidt. I'm the Sales Operations Manager here at DerbySoft. Feel free to reach out with me, and I'd be happy to chat with you or work with you by email to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you again once for your time here, and we hope you have a great day.